right, welcome. Thank you, Dominic and Gracie, for joining us. And thank you, Ryan and Will, for being here. This is Nancy Turbach-Berry, Chair of the Coalition for Freedom Amendment G. And I'm excited because today we have still another set of leaders stepping up to help with the final push to get Amendment G passed. As you may know, we had nearly 27,000 South Dakota men that signed the petition to support Amendment G and get it on the ballot to restore reproductive rights previously established by Roe versus Wade. And the initiative, of course, has emerged in response to South Dakota's extreme abortion ban, which affects women and girls in South Dakota, but we sometimes tend to overlook that it also affects families and the men in them. So today I'm introducing Will Bushy and Ryan Otto, who have agreed to be the spokespeople and leaders for the Men for Freedom Amendment. And I guess I'll start with Will and ask if you talk a little bit about what you see as men's role in the movement.
Yeah, well, I just want to start by saying I just can't believe it's 2024 and we're having this conversation. I mean, it just absolutely blows my mind. And I've got a lot of friends and family that live in other states. And when I explain to them South Dakota's position on abortion, they just shake their head and they're like, I just can't believe it. And so my role has been, ever since the Roe v. Wade was changed, I mean, I have reached out to this organization and offered anything that I can do to help. I'm here. And I've been helping for over a year and a half on trying to get the message out. And when it comes to men specifically, obviously it's a huge percentage of our population. And these decisions are not just made in a vacuum. I mean, men have the same responsibilities when it comes to children, and they should be part of that conversation. And it's not just kind of a one-off decision that people just make randomly. And I just feel super passionate that we need to change this in South Dakota, and we need to change it in every other state that has limited access to abortion. The other thing that I always come back to is that in South Dakota, even before Roe v. Wade, it was one of the most difficult states to even have an abortion. And when I explain that to other people that don't live in the state, it just blows their mind that we have been this way for so many years. And we just simply have to fix it, and we have to move forward. So that's why I'm here and why I'm in support of everything that's been pushing forward to get this passed.
And Will, I probably left over what I should have started with, which is just tell us a little bit about yourself. I did Google you when I found out you were going to do this, and I know you've won some award. That was the first thing that popped up is you on stage with the mayor and arms raised. So maybe you're famous elsewhere, but just for the record, I guess give Dominic and Gracie just a little bit of an orientation as to sort of who you are.
Yeah, Will Bushy, I've been in South Dakota for about 30 plus years. And so we obviously consider this a home. We have two children. They're both adults at this point, a boy and a girl. And my daughter's up at Dakota State University and she's 21. And obviously she's the most impacted of any of our immediate family on these types of decisions. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what more is relevant on my background towards this particular fight, but I know a lot of people in South Dakota and lived here for a long time.
Thanks. The other, the co-chair of Men for Freedom Amendment G is Ryan Otto. And Ryan, I'll ask you to briefly introduce yourself and then talk a little bit about why you've made a personal commitment to expanding, I should say, restoring reproductive rights.
Yes, thank you for having me. My name is Ryan Otto. I've been in Sioux Falls about 20 years now. My wife and I have been married 19 years, and we have two girls that are 12 and 9. So yes, I'm a dad of daughters, and also this issue is much bigger than that for me. It certainly affects all of us. And my former career, I am an ordained minister, and I was formerly serving at First Congregational Church in downtown Sioux Falls. So I was there just over 12 years. So also what informs my decision in supporting Amendment G is also those experiences as a minister, that there are many, many stories of women and young people in challenging situations who really needed to have a choice, essentially. And this current abortion ban gives no choice. It is just simply too extreme. And I believe that Amendment G offers reasonable framework for choices that a woman and a family can respond to the complexity of health and life. So I think it is really critical that we pass Amendment G to provide a more reasonable ability to care for one another.
You know, because this issue often is cast as a women's issue, and frequently it is women at the forefront, standing in front of the mics. Do you think sometimes men are hesitant to speak up, or for that or any other reason? And what are your thoughts about that? About whether you've encountered other men hesitant to speak up, and if so, what your message to them would be?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one key moment for me in getting involved is being part of postcard writing for the movement, and I was amazed at the absence of men showing up for those events. And I do think that there is a hesitancy. Talking with friends, there are some who say yes, they will vote for Amendment G, but there's a hesitancy to put themselves out there and to speak out. I think it's not just for dads with daughters, right? This is again for it's an issue that affects all of us, and I think today we see I think a real critical moment in which we step up and show solidarity for the women in our lives and be present, really take time and listen and understand, and that our voices really can amplify their voices. We don't have to always say the right things, but I think by pausing, being quiet for a minute and listening and hearing their voices gives us a chance to get it right and to really amplify their points of view, their perspectives, their lives that we need to pay more attention to.
You know, one of the most vicious and I think effective lies that opponents of Amendment G have been telling is that the amendments would allegedly strip parents of consent. And you probably know that's not true, that parental consent survives a constitutional right to amendment. So talk a little bit more about what you see the father's role. I mean, you're absolutely right, Ryan, that it's not just fathers, but why should fathers care about this issue, imagining that they may have minor daughters that are old enough to be impregnated? Will, you got thoughts
Is
about
that for
that?
either of us? Oh.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's just something that I think unless people have come across it in their own lives, they just don't understand the challenges that are going to happen. And I know it's easy to say one thing, but when it's easy to say, well, we're pro-life and we want to honor the any babies that are being born. I mean, that's fine, but there's always these uncertain circumstances that people just ignore. And then I think that until you had to come across that in your own life, which most people unfortunately don't have to, I think that's where a lot of that hesitancy is. I mean, as a father, I mean, we would go to any extent for any of our children to make sure they're healthy and that there's anything that needed to have happen could happen. And of course, in South Dakota, that's just not an option. And we're lucky enough that if something were to happen that we needed to leave the state, it really would not be a big deal. But there are so many people in South Dakota that is just simply not an option, and it's just a little bit silly to put your head in the sand and say, well, there's only one answer, and that is no rights to abortions anywhere. And that's just so extreme that it just doesn't even make sense.
Ryan, what do you see for the next 7 days? I mean, we're 7 days until the end of the seventh day, the polls close. What do you see yourself doing, and what do you call on other men to do? What should they be doing in the closing days of this race?
Yeah, I will continue to be writing postcards, hopefully making some phone calls as well, and just continue to get the word out about why this matters and why to support and to say yes on Amendment G. And I think my encouragement would be, even if those men out there are hesitant to speak up, show up at the polls, whether that's in the next few days, getting to the county auditor's office or showing up on Tuesday, November 5th, show up and vote yes on G. I mean, that is the very least we can do, is to show our support. And of course, that's private and confidential. So for those that may fear putting themselves out there, that should be an easy yes to show up by next Tuesday.
Will, anything you want to add before I invite questions?
No, I agree with Ryan. I mean, it's the big thing that I think people need to understand is that if you actually go read the amendment and see what it says, and then you compare that to what the opposition is saying, they don't match at all. Like, the amendment does not go into a lot of the rhetoric that the opposition is saying out there. You mentioned it a second ago around parental rights and abortions after birth and taking away all of these options. And it's just not the case at all. I mean, it's a very short, succinct amendment. And I think a lot of people just think that's just part of it and that there's a bigger story that's being hidden. And that's just simply not true. I mean, it literally is 4 paragraphs long. And I think everybody really needs to take that serious when they read it. And the other thing, I know what Ryan had just said, I think it's worth reiterating, is that it is a secret, private decision that you will make, and nobody's going to know what you voted on election day. And you need to look into your heart and say, well, if something happens to a family member, a daughter or a sister or a wife, do you want them to have this option? It's not saying you have to take the option. It literally gives you the option if you need it, versus having 0 options at all. And that's the key thing I want everybody to look into and to remember when they're voting yes on G.
Thanks. Dominic and Gracie, thank you for joining us. Any questions for these gentlemen?
Yeah, thanks for hosting. And again, Nancy, and I think this is the 3rd one I've been a part of. Still don't have a working webcam, so I apologize for being the faceless inquirer once again. But a question for both, or for everyone wants to take it, Will and Ryan. Kind of, what do you think is the argument maybe that you could make, or what's the argument that you would make for, we're talking about a call to action to men. I feel like sometimes, maybe young men, young men who aren't fathers, might not be able to connect to this issue, just because, they don't have that experience of raising a child, a daughter. What's the argument that you make to them to say that you should support Amendment G?
Yeah, I think the big thing, if you're just wandering around the state and you're not necessarily paying super close attention, you're going to see incorrect information about the amendment. And I see it driving down the street on billboards. I see it in handouts. I helped out this organization during the petition signs, and I saw the decline to sign people out there saying the opposite of what a lot of the amendment is doing. And it's easy to fall into that and just say, well, it's radical left trying to push some agenda, but that's not the case at all. And so my advice to anybody that has not actually gone out and read the information is to go read that information, to see what the amendment says, especially the men. I think men take a quick knee-jerk reaction on it and say, well, it doesn't really apply to me, but I'm fine with restrictions because I don't want these crazy things to happen. But the reality is the crazy things that they're saying are happening simply aren't in the amendment.
I think, considering young men out there, perhaps those who don't have children just yet, and others, that to me, what is just too extreme is that there is a lack of exception in the case of rape. And for young men who may have a girlfriend, many of us as young people think we're invincible. This will never happen to me. This would never happen to my girlfriend. This would never affect me personally. But I think the challenge is, and the painful thing is that unfortunately this does happen, and we need to be able to provide options in those terrible situations. And the current law is just too extreme that doesn't allow any exceptions for rape. And so this amendment offers that framework to consider, if you find yourself in that situation or a loved one, that you will have options at that time.
Gracie, anything you'd like to ask?
Yes. I have a question for Will. I had just couldn't hear at the very beginning there. So just wondering kind of what your connection is with the the abortion amendment. You had said that you have daughters. Is that kind of your main reasoning, or just that you're someone that's passionate about it, or kind of how did you come into being a co-chair for this group? And I guess Ryan, if you'd like to add to that too, but you had kind of said that you also have daughters and are a reverend.
It's crazy. I at the beginning there, I did say that I have one daughter. She's 21 years old, and I mean that's not the only reason. I mean I'm a big advocate for women's rights and for anybody's rights. And South Dakota is very restrictive in a lot of women's rights, and I just think that's grossly inappropriate for 2024. I mean, we should not be treating women differently. And so anytime there's an issue that really hits hard to minorities or women, I'm always an advocate for trying to help them out. And so that's one of the main reasons why I've joined this organization, to help push this message. It's one that affects a substantial amount of the population, and it could potentially impact my family as well. But it's not just my family. It's all women in South Dakota that deserve this right.
Yes, and I do have a wife and two daughters. And I think, as I mentioned, for me, this is much bigger than that. Yes, it affects me personally and my family personally, but also I think looking at the current law, I think there's many issues with laws that that dehumanize others, and that is a key thing for me. If this is a dehumanizing law, and that is dangerous, and it needs to change. And so I believe that offering an amendment that gives choice is critical.
And then just one last thing, Nancy. So how you at the beginning there, you had said you had listed the amount of men that had signed the initial petition. What was that number again?
I think the exact number, I said 27,000. The exact number is 26,984.
Okay, I had heard 30,000 thrown out there, so I just wanted to make sure that number was correct with what I had seen on the press release. So, all right, thank you.
Well, somebody rounded it up more than I did. I rounded it up to 27, but it's 26. It's six. If we could have gotten 6 guys off the couch at the football game or whatever, watching the football game, we'd have had 27,000. One thought that crossed my mind, and I want to share this in case it's of interest to Gracie or Dominic, or maybe even Will or Ryan, but as these men were talking, I couldn't help but think back to the fact that we often forget, and that is that the very framework of Amendment G was actually created by men. In 1973, the U.S. Supreme Court, which of course was all 9 were men, decided the Roe decision on a 7-2 vote. So the very framework, the Amendment G is identical to the framework that these 7 men that were in the majority created. And I kind of find it interesting to think back about who they were, especially when opponents of this framework claim that it's so extreme. So just here's a little trivia for you about the 7 men that created what is now Amendment G. Their average age was 65. They were members of various churches, some quite active. Their religions included Presbyterian, Episcopal, Methodist, and even a Catholic. One of them was from Minnesota, and he had a special passion for healthcare and had worked for Mayo Clinic for years. One was a World War I veteran and the son of a minister. 3 were World War II veterans, including an Air Force colonel, an Army colonel, and a lieutenant commander of the U.S. Navy. And all but 2 of those men were appointed by Dwight Eisenhower or Richard Nixon. So when folks like to say that this is some kind of a radical ban, it's good sometimes to think back to the people that first created it and ask yourself if it's credible that this is radical. And I think when we think back about the 7 men that signed on to the opinion written by Justice Blackmun now 51 years ago, we realize it's actually very moderate and the most fundamental statement of a basic human right. So thank you for letting me interject with my little nerdy capture from legal history, but I just think that perspective is interesting when especially when we're talking about the role of men in safeguarding the healthcare rights of women. That prompt anything else, Dominic or Gracie or Will or Ryan, anything else anybody wants to say or ask?
If I could just ask, just, we are coming up to November 5th. How are you feeling, Nancy, just about the campaign as we're coming, sort of to a close here? Just the confidence level, like how do you feel so far?
Well, that's a good question. I guess if I graphed it during the day, it would be like this, probably. When I think about the fact that South Dakotans twice before have soundly rejected a ban, and I think about the early polling on this, I feel very confident. And when I talk to people like Will and Ryan and think about the actual facts, it's very heartening. But when I drive down the street and see the misleading signs, and then I recognize that millions, and I mean millions, have been spent to perpetuate lies about what this amendment does in an effort to scare South Dakota voters, I have to be concerned. And so, like Will and Ryan, I am working down to the wire to try to speak up and make sure that people understand what it's about and what it's not about. If this amendment does not pass, it will not be because South Dakotans don't really want what's in the amendment. It will be because they have been duped by the well-financed campaign of misrepresentations. And I think that would really be a sad day for South Dakota. So I'm maintaining my energy. I'm looking forward to relaxing on Wednesday morning. But until then, I think we just have to keep getting the word out about what this amendment really does, and try to battle the fire hose of lies that is coming from the other side.
Yeah, my wife shares Nancy's up and down throughout the day as well, and I frequently have to talk her out of the downs. One of the things that I think, if you had an opportunity to go out and see some of the petition signing events earlier last year, I think you'd be very heartened with what the sentiment was. I helped out a lot at the farmers market because there was a lot of issues with the other side harassing people that wanted to sign the petition. Now, keep in mind, this was just to sign the petition. This wasn't saying you're for or against it. It was literally just to put it on the ballot. So these people, we know why they were there, but I mean, they were misleading the people even trying to get it on the ballot so people could vote on Tuesday. But one of the things that I just keep coming back to over and over again would be to see wives come up and they would have to walk past the decline to sign, yelling and screaming that they hate babies. And they didn't even fully understand at that time what Amendment G was, what they were assigned. I mean, I wasn't Amendment G at the time, but they didn't know if they were pro or against or why we were even collecting signatures. And sometimes they were successful and people would defer and just go the other direction rather than deal with it. But some of them would circle back around and confirm, like, okay, why are you getting these petitions? And then after the petition signers would explain, they were just so overjoyed with the opportunity to get this on the ballot and to vote yes for it when it did come up. You would see them come back 5 minutes later. They would go get their friend or their mother or their kids that were of voting age and come sign it. Some cases they would bring their husbands over, and it was just, like I said, it was a very surreal time for South Dakota. We were just coming out of a lot of the pandemic. This had obviously been overturned earlier. Roe v. Wade was overturned earlier. Emotions were really, really high. And it was just so comforting to go out and spend 4 hours at an event and see women coming up and just so grateful that this petition was being signed. And I also can't tell you how many people from out of state would come over and just ask, what is going on? Why are you signing this? This is just insane. Like why is this even a thing in South Dakota? And if we could have got people that didn't live here to sign the petition, it would have been 5 times more people based on the amount of people we saw at the farmers market alone. The emotions are really high around this amendment, and I know Nancy's far closer to it than I, but I'm feeling really good about this passing.
There is something particular about the battle over this amendment that is so intensely personal. And because it does touch on such key issues of personal freedom and moral values and individual rights, the tensions do tend to be high. And unfortunately, that frequently manifests itself in things that are quite disrespectful and oppressive. And I have not personally been harassed, although a fellow supporter said, well, that's because everybody's afraid of you, Nancy. But I did, I was just contacted by a man who is asking for his 5th yard sign because they keep getting stolen. And there's something, I think the fact that so much of the opposition and the falsehoods that the opposition has spewed comes from the pulpits, that there are people who feel justified to do anything, including personal harassment, theft of campaign signs, and even threatening behavior, that it makes it difficult sometimes for people to stand up. But as has been pointed out, ultimately, they just need to stand up when they're at the polls. And whether or not they can weather the harassment that some folks get when they speak up for women's rights in public or not, they can in private vote. And so, that's really what we're looking forward to, is an end to the campaign and a chance for people to, in private, cast their vote and express their support for the personal freedoms of doctors and women in South Dakota.
Yeah, and generally speaking, South Dakotas like to avoid confrontation. So I think that's another thing. I know on our block, there's it's probably 5 to 1 on vote no versus vote yes. And there's a very small block, including my house, that has a vote yes. And the other signs were all there because I put them there. Very few of my neighbors would have gone out of their way to show their support, even though I know they support it. And I think that's another big thing to think about. And that's the other thing, again, you walk around and my wife gets concerned about all the vote no's. And I honestly think a lot of those people that have vote no signs in their yard are going to vote yes, but for the same reasons you just mentioned, Nancy. It's fear, it's intimidation. Maybe their husband put the sign out, but the wife doesn't support it, and they're just not willing to confront it. And I reached out to a couple other dads before today's event to see if they're willing to join, and they all said, yes, I'm absolutely 100% in support of Amendment G, but no, I will not come on the Zoom and mention that, because in a way it's a South Dakota thing, but generally speaking, people just don't want to avoid that confrontation completely. And I think, unfortunately, the other side doesn't seem to have that same hesitancy. And that's where the times that I did help out with the petition signers, I was really surprised at how far they pushed the line. I mean, they literally would get in front of a patron, not even a poll taker, and just yell things in their face. And they don't even know these people. Like, it could have just been a random person walking by, but they just didn't hesitate to put their personal views out at the farmers market. And I think that's something that the other side is just, it's all rhetoric. And I think when it really gets down to it, the voices in South Dakota are going to make the right decision. And I'm going to keep reaching out to other men, fathers, and everybody that I know, and see if they have any questions on the amendment.
Nancy,
All right, thanks, everybody. Can we wrap it up?
can I throw in one more quick
Sure,
question?
of course, Dominic.
Just wanted to see just more of a if I could ask a reaction question. I'm not sure, you might be aware, this Columbus, Ohio group, Created Equal, is putting on and it's an anti-abortion group putting on a display in Sioux Falls where they're going to be showing graphic images of aborted fetal remains. Are you aware of that? And do you have a reaction to them doing this, or have you heard about that?
I wasn't aware of it,
Okay.
but I'm not surprised. I kind of wondered when that was coming. And these gruesome scare tactics are really unfortunate, and they're also misleading. 95% of abortions are in the first trimester. The majority are by medication. I don't know if these are AI generated images or where they get them. It doesn't really matter. But once again, it's an example of them not being willing to confront the amendment as it is, not being willing to stand up to the reality, but instead trying to distort a reality or distort a position so they can argue against it. And, I've been a courtroom litigator for 43 years, and I've noticed over the years that when opponents distort your position to try to fight against it, it's a pretty good indication that they don't really have a very good argument against your actual position. And that's what I think people need to remember when they see these kind of, these gruesome tactics that are, they're fighting something that we're not proposing. And it's just really, it's dishonest, and it's really unfortunate.
Thanks for fielding that, and thanks, Nancy, Will, and Ryan for answering.